All right, so we should be recording now. So today's presentation will be on accessibility and really looking at the ways we create access or deny access through design. We'll be going over hostile design practices, universal design principles. We'll discuss surveying your site for accessibility. We'll discuss the guide to architectural accessibility. And last, we'll talk about developing your next assignment for precedent studies. Okay, so I'm really excited about this class today. You all read the assigned reading, which is accessibility through design. Someone go ahead and state what the assigned reading was for accessibility. Joshua, since you were first in class today.
You're asking for the title, right? Or
Correct.
yeah, the design accessibility, and it was Cultural Administrator's Handbook.
Exactly. So we'll be discussing some components of that as it relates to site analysis and site overview. So I'm really excited about today's class because it is going to be a great transition into you all thinking about what design interventions you want to make. I'll also be going over some really cool examples on how to identify your site and print it out on Google Maps to support your landscape interventions concept development. So let's go ahead and get into it. We'll go ahead and start it off with this great video. Go ahead, talking about hostile design. So definitely take notes. Again, we'll be talking about universal design principles, but I definitely wanted to talk about hostile design, especially since a lot of the things we've been talking about are urban sustainability and the urban environment and what that looks for different stakeholder groups, specifically interventions for people experiencing homelessness and people who are representative of marginalized communities. How do you create access through design principles, and what does hostile design look like for these marginalized communities and demographics, and who's inadvertently impacted by some of these design considerations?
Imagine your favorite public space. Maybe it's a park or a square or your neighborhood street. What is it that makes it great? There's most likely a place to sit and rest and watch the world go by. There's probably some form of shelter from the sun and the rain. Maybe there's other people, families with young children, an elderly couple out for a stroll. Now imagine the opposite. A public space that you dislike. For me, this is Yonge and Dundas Square in Toronto, our version of New York's Times Square. Lined with video screens and bright lights, it's not really a place that I want to stop and linger. It can be pretty disorienting. And even if I did, the benches that are there look more like abstract art than a place to sit. All around us, design shapes how we experience the city. Some features are meant to guide us, provide amenity, or keep us safe, while others are meant to exclude. What looks to be a form of medieval torture is actually an example of defensive urban design. Also known as hostile, unpleasant, or exclusive architecture, it's used to guide or restrict behavior in urban space as a form of crime prevention or protection of property. It's an intentional design strategy that targets people who use or rely on public spaces more than others, like people who are homeless and youth. And it does this by targeting the behaviors they engage in. Not only does it limit possible activities, it conveys messages like who belongs here and who is welcome in this space. Over the past 3 years, I've been studying defensive urban design in Toronto, Canada's largest and most populous city. What started as research while I was a planning student at York University turned into Defensive TO, an online project that documents its various forms. Taking Toronto as a starting point and expanding to other cities, Defensive TO works to uncover hidden design strategies that are meant to exclude. Forms of defensive design vary depending on the behavior it's designed to restrict. Drawing from hundreds of photos I've taken in Europe and North America, I've tried to categorize its most common forms. Modified seating is the most visible form of defensive design. Benches with a center bar are designed to keep homeless people from sleeping on them. And seating without backrests are meant to keep people from lingering for too long. Ledges are also targeted because they attract unwanted behaviors like skateboarding or loitering. They can be adapted with metal objects called caps or pig's ears. Or they can be specially designed with varying angles to keep people from skateboarding or lying down. Barriers can be temporary or permanent and are used to restrict access to urban space. Examples include rocks placed underneath an overpass to keep people from seeking refuge, or planter boxes that are placed strategically to keep people from skateboarding along a ledge. Surface treatments also transform how we interact with the city. Objects can be embedded into surfaces to keep people off. And in Toronto, utility poles are wrapped in a special material that prevents postering. Light can be used to increase visibility and safety in a space, but it can also be used as a deterrent depending on its brightness and quality. Blue lights are used in washrooms to prevent drug users from finding a vein. And in the UK, pink lights are used to amplify the acne and resulting social discomfort of loitering youth. Sound is also used to target youth. An anti-loitering device called the mosquito emits an irritating high-pitched sound that only young people can hear. And this device was actually used in a Toronto park a few years ago. And it was located close to nearby youth shelter. But after it made media headlines, they decided to remove it. And finally, surveillance cameras are commonplace in cities around the world. But as technology advances, Forms change. Recently, in San Francisco, an anti-homeless robot was spotted patrolling the space outside of an animal shelter, which was also the location of a homeless camp. This 400-pound robot on wheels was used to read license plates and record security footage until the city ordered it to stay off public sidewalks or face daily fines. Not only can defensive elements be added to a space, objects or amenities can be removed, and this removes certain functions. This is what I call ghost amenities. These are public amenities like washrooms, water fountains, and benches that should be included in public spaces to make them more hospitable, but are not, as a way to reduce costs or to prevent vandalism or misuse. And although this design strategy isn't discussed as much as others, it's often easier to remove an element than it is to alter it or to construct something new. While defensive design is pervasive, it's often hidden in plain sight. Implicit forms are largely invisible to everyday users. And this is because its coercive functions are hidden within more socially acceptable ones, like a bench designed to keep people from lying down, still allows for the function of sitting. Only when it becomes explicit do people take notice. Last spring, curved metal bars were installed on top of a grate outside of a downtown Toronto hospital. The bars provoked outrage by the community because it was explicit in its target, function, and message. Its target was people who were homeless. Its function was to keep them from lying on top of the warm grate. And its message was, "You are not welcome here." After much public pressure, the hospital apologized and removed the offending structure. Whether implicit or explicit, defensive design is a form of urban censorship. Who we see in our public spaces informs our idea of who is a part of the public. When we use design to address social issues like homelessness, substance use, or mental illness, it merely displaces the problem rather than confronting it. This creates a distorted version of the city, free from poverty and social discomfort. And this is a problem because it is through our encounters of difference and experiencing the other that we learn different values, forms of expression, and the unknown becomes known. Not only does defensive design target so-called undesirable users, it also makes public space inaccessible for others, for people who are blind or hard of seeing. Defensive elements can be a hazard if they're accidentally tripped on or sat on, and for people who are elderly or have a disability. The lack of public amenities like benches and washrooms makes navigating public space difficult or impossible. Rather than using design to exclude, we should be using design to bring people together. And this starts with recognizing that everyone should have the right to access the benefits of public space. In Montreal, when the city decided to redesign a city center park, home to a number of substance users and people who are homeless, rather than using design to displace, they decided to bring people together by making the park a focal point for social services. While it may seem like defensive design is everywhere, it doesn't have to be this way. We can all advocate for more inclusive public spaces. You can go to a neighborhood planning meeting or contact your local politician. You can start a social media campaign or link into one that already exists. From New York to LA, people are documenting defensive design under the hashtag hostile design. And in France, homeless charities have started an online campaign and mapping project under the hashtag Soyons Humains, which means let's be human. In order to create a truly inclusive city, we must not shy away from difference in our public spaces. Everyone deserves to have a place in their city, and everyone should have the right to access the benefits of public space. Thank you.
So I hope you all enjoyed that video. We'll go ahead and go into our icebreaker and reflecting on the video. I want you all to share, how have you witnessed or experienced hostile design? How have you witnessed or experienced hostile design? I'll start with you, Edgar.
I've experienced those the little bars in between benches almost anywhere I've gone. It's like super common use here in California, and I've experienced that before. But also, I live downtown and I live on Main Street, like Main and Fourth, so I'm right near Los Angeles. And there's a building just down the street from my house that the entire front section of the building is they included the what you call the surface treatments, and it's just covered in stones. You know, it's like cemented stones so that homeless people don't sleep on there. And you know, in turn, it doesn't necessarily work because you know, unfortunately, Skid Row is what it is, and there still is people sleeping on the sidewalks right next to that same building. So yeah, I mean, like I've seen the surface treatments many times. I've seen the benches, and I never put the bench bars, like I never put one, you know, two and two together. But that totally makes sense. It's really obvious. Like even for me, who like have waited at a bus station for half an hour, it's like maybe I kind of want to like lean over. It's like pretty uncomfortable situation. So that's one. Yeah, I mean that video was very enlightening, honestly. And I mean, in comparison to with skateboarding, I've skateboarded like for you know the last 18 years of my life, and watching skate videos from Europe and places like Berlin and just the other cities, like famous cities in Europe where there's just broad plazas, like skateboarding is welcome, and you do have like an intermingle of different kinds of people. You know, you do have homeless people sleeping, but nobody is, you know, there's an inclusion, and like people understand that inclusion. It's like unspokenly because of how big these plazas are, how welcoming they are, how many like broad seating areas they are, and still being able to be like architecturally, you know, appealing to you know, to them. It's cool. Like I've always wished that there was parks like this in California, like big plazas for large gatherings, and you know, people just lay on the grass and people do whatever they want, you know, skaters and people from all walks of life, kind of like what Love Park was at one point in New York, before they started restricting people from going to Love Park and you know, just hanging out, and instead of, you know, they were just kicking people out. Eventually they put a huge fence all around Love Park, and now it's not Love Park anymore. You know? Yeah, that's
sharing those examples, Edgar. Those are some really great examples. I think when we're talking about what was seen in the video, you gave examples that showed how they added things to surface, those surface treatments and those bars, to prevent folks from skating. Those are really big components, but also the removal of different infrastructure or the removal of access. And so, yeah, thank you again for sharing those examples. Let's go to you, Giselle.
Um, going going off of what Edgar said, I've also seen the benches, and I think that's like a really prominent one I've focused on a lot. But in terms of experience, I know one time I went on a field trip with to Denver, and in the main square, there was just always a police officer roaming, kicking people out if they looked like unhoused or if they just looked like they didn't belong or something. So that's about it.
Thank you for sharing that, Giselle. Some of the things that were talked about were the hyper surveillance, right? And who gets access to site and how that's policed. So thanks for sharing that example. Going to try to not share the memories that are coming to mind. I'm pass it to Catherine.
I was on that same Denver field trip, and two different things that I noticed were benches that were curved just to make it a lot harder for people to lay. And then this may or may not be one, but I noticed like downtown areas, there's a lot of rocky pavement. And I don't know if that is to prevent people from being able to lay because I don't really see a purpose of it elsewhere.
Hmm. That's a good point. You know, it's interesting, like once you're aware of it, you're like, wow, I have noticed that somewhere, you know? Yeah, so thanks for sharing that. Let's go to you, Hermelo.
Well, yes, hi. Honestly, I don't really, I'm somebody who doesn't really look around when I go out. Um, so I don't know much what to say. I just got surprised right now when I watched the video because I think that was very strong for me to find out that um, you have to do whatever you can with those benches in order to keep away homeless people. Um, is I got a little bit unhappy because we all humans, and my main question is who are the most educated, the ones that have a degree or the ones that doesn't have any degree at all, because we don't understand anything about respect and limiting somebody who is a person because it's not, well, I don't think it even animal because I noticed that people, whoever has a dog or any pet, they love their pets. So I don't understand why we humans treat each other like that. It's just, I just don't get it. That's my
Yeah.
opinion.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Hermelo. Um, I want you to reflect on your project that you turned in, right? For the design accessibility.
Yes.
And what examples came to mind for you during that project as far as access in the environment? Because you brought us some really cool topics in there that I thought were interesting, that I'm sure were reflected in the reading, but it seemed that you put your lived experience in there, which I always really appreciate when you all do that in reflection of the readings.
Well, what I remember about the reading is the accessibility, and anybody who is disabled have the right and has a right, and we um, definitely is support from the government, and yeah, that's what I remember from the reading. That's the most important part.
Awesome.
But benches on the street, I think that's it's to me like a little bit out of the range. I just don't really get that part.
Yeah, well, just to dig in on that a little bit, Hermelo, well, one of the components that was brought up in the video we just read, and even reflecting on your project, what happens, there's some, what do you call it, inadvertent impacts of design. And so like when we're talking about accessibility for people who have disabilities, and then this goal of denying access to people who are experiencing homelessness, those are two competing agendas. And so if you are trying to displace people who are experiencing homelessness, you're also displacing people who are experiencing disabilities. Because say, for example, if they're trying to access a certain area, now they're not able to access that area because of those bars, or they're not able to access that area because of the surface treatments, for example, right? In
Right.
other ways, that accessibility isn't really about disability, but just a lack of common ability, right? And so one of the things that in the work that I do around equity, accessibility around language access, right? Language access is critical. And a lot of times we live in very diverse communities, but the public infrastructure doesn't reflect the need for language access when people are trying to receive services, access programs, or even access, basic public infrastructure. And so what does that look like in a community who the demographics is predominantly, let's say, speaks a different language other than English, right? But all of the public infrastructure is only in English. Is that access? Is that what it should be, right? Those questions can be considered. But
Also, I want to add one more thing. Before I moved to Pomona, that was a couple months ago, my neighborhood just have a meeting, and they explain right there that people who live around the neighborhood, they want to improve, or the city allow the neighbors to expand your house or build something else at your backyard, and then you can allow those more people to move in because uh, it,
those
everything.
ADUs.
Yes, because
Mhm.
everything is becoming so expensive, and a lot of people are homeless because they can't afford the rent, neither to buy a house. And that really surprised me because it is very serious. And then I understood much better that to become a homeless, you don't have to have any mental disease or whatever problem a lot of people, or I don't know what other people think about. You don't need to have any physical problem in order to become a homeless. Um, it can involve a lot of things. Also, I heard that um, I don't remember at what university is so expensive that students they can afford the rent, and they sleep on their in their car, and the university just allow them to take a shower in the I think in the gym department, the gym area where they exercise. So it surprised me a lot that students definitely become a homeless in order to get an education. And my idea came, well, I don't know what I can do myself in order to change this, because eventually it will become more and more difficult. So luckily I'm not in that position that um, um I don't know, you never know, I might become homeless sometimes in my life, but I hope not. And I don't want to be homeless myself. So yeah, um, I just I don't know what we
Thanks
could.
for sharing that, Hermilo. Thanks for sharing that. Let's go to you, Vivian.
Um, an example of hostile architecture that I've seen is at Universal Studios. There's this area where the park is open to the public, in between like the parking garage and like the main park itself. And there was an issue with, I guess, homeless people who were experiencing homelessness, sleeping on the benches there. And they added these like rainbow painted rocks on top of the benches to make it like look like a part of the design of the benches and the planters, to allow people to stop people from sleeping on the benches there. And I thought it was interesting because like design wise it was like super cute, colorful, but its intentions weren't the same.
Yeah, no, that's a really great example. that the way that we build access through design and how it's visible or invisible and who that is for. Thanks for sharing that, Vivian. Let's go to you, Ryan. All right, cool. We'll have you write that in the chat, Ryan, and I'll read it off for you. In the meantime, let's go to Nawi.
There's not many examples where oh wait, actually, yes. I used to skateboard a lot when I was like in middle school as well as like early high school. And I used to go to places like Monterey Park. There's a few parks in my own community in El Sereno. And I noticed that on some of the benches they put like these buttons or I don't know, they're kind of like bolts, or I'm not sure what they are, but it's to prevent people from like grinding their skateboards on the side of like these benches. And that's one way I've experienced it. But I've seen like spikes a lot of the times that what do you call that, they're usually like against the corners of walls. I've also seen benches with like those unnecessarily large armrests, but there's not exactly too many times where I can recount that I was personally affected by hostile architecture other than what I've seen and how it affects other people. I've also seen it's not necessarily in Los Angeles, but in Mexico, what I've seen people do is kind of the same thing like what people do with rocks, and they place them so that people can't lay down, except they use shards of glass and broken bottles instead to, I guess, make more of a point that you're not welcomed in those areas. But
That'll
yeah,
make a point to me at least. No, that's a great example of hostile design. Now, thanks for sharing. We'll go to Jesus and then to Joshua.
Yeah, I mean, being from downtown LA, I think the one that's most common is the benches. They often, and I mean, I understand why they do it. I've seen many like even bus stops and which many times become like home to, let's say, a homeless encampment or something like that, and totally not friendly towards them. But yeah, I mean, the benches is one of the big things that I've seen often, and now I think also they start implementing it into, let's say, like handrails of sorts and stuff. I mean, I went to Belmont High School, and I also grew up around, skateboarding and these kind of things. And I used to skate around Belmont High School as well, but many times, I mean, at least now I know that, a lot of these methods have been applied to many of the architectures around. So yeah, I think just overall the bus stops are the main thing that I've seen mostly that affect homeless people directly. But another thing is what people don't realize is that these are not just like deterrents, but they also cause like um, possible danger to people. Like especially specifically if, let's say, you're walking by one of these areas and you fall on one of these sharp like edges, like you could clearly like hurt yourself. Imagine you hit yourself on the head with one of those sharp edges, like I mean, who do you sue then? The city? Like, like who's responsible for these things to them? I'm sure it's happened to people in which they've fallen and they cause serious injury.
Yeah,
So,
no, that is a perfect point. And hostile design definitely impacts more than the people that it's intended to. And so you all will have a chance to talk about that a bit in your reflection question. But before that, let's go to Joshua and then we'll close out with Ricardo. And then I'll be waiting for Ryan's text in the chat so I can read that out loud.
Not necessarily like only people, but also like pets as well. Because sometimes, well, there's like a few parks I go to that are sometimes not really pet friendly. Because especially well, there's like these open grass fields too that I sometimes want to take my dog out just to go run around or even just play ball with him. But it's just like how you say it? It's enclosed like with these gated fences or like these gated walls or something like that, and like it's always locked. And honestly, I don't know if like you had to go into like an office or to get access to it, but like most of the times like there's nobody there, and uh it just limits like your activity, like with just it like barely just walking your dog, or like also just just having fun with them or something like that. But yeah.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Joshua. Thinking about the different ways design impacts people, but also pets, which again extends to the person, right? Because many people who have pets, they want, their pets are a part of their lives. And so when there's infrastructure that intends not to allow pets to be, present on site. For example, many apartments require either insurance or down payment to allow pets to live with you, right? And so those things are, and sometimes they just altogether say no pets at all, right? So those things are deterrents from pets, but also whether or not a site has access, like many beaches say you can't have your pet at the beach. Many parks are set, don't allow pet dogs on the grass. And so there is a lot that I've noticed, like a lot of development of dog parks, but that's a really good example, Josh, of thinking about pets and the inclusion of pet friendly spaces as well. Ryan, I see that you put something in the chat. I'll go ahead and read that off before we go to part of the close this out. Something I've seen often would be implementations placed on seating to prevent skating. It is especially common in smaller parks that I've been to. One park had an area for skateboarding, but the rest of the park had metal bridges placed on the benches every 2 to 3 feet. That sounds really intense. I wonder if someone was like ambitious enough to try to do a trick on it, like every 2 to 3 feet, grind, jump, but yeah, no, that's a really great example. I think, some of you all mentioned the different implications of why these things that are being referred to as hostile design play a role in society. And there are situations where you may see that as a design intervention that is relevant to increase safety of wildlife or whatever. But identifying what the purpose is of your design intervention is going to be really critical, right? Identifying precedent. And then being honest, right? Being honest with your intentions is going to be critical, especially when you're building your concepts in the academic space, but then being honest with yourself when you're in the professional space of what the professional project is achieving, right? So there are components, right, that you may be able to push back on, like ADA compliance and so on and so forth. And these may be things that you can speak to prevent the most damaging implications of hostile design. So always remember your advocacy against it. Let's go ahead and get back into the lecture. We'll go ahead and take a couple of minutes to respond to the questions in the chat. I'll put on some music for us. You all already answered. Oh wait, Ricardo, let's go to you. Bring us home.
Alrighty, well, I guess the most common was the benches, but when I was at Universal City, they also had the circle with the little circles on top of benches, and they were painted as well to make it seem as it was part of the whole design. And obviously I caught it just because I also have some history in architecture. So it's just a common thing to have, some blocks on benches so people won't sit on it. But it's more of funny that they imply it and propose it for skaters to not be skating on it. But I mean, in reality, it's more of like keeping homeless from being in the area. So it's just kind of like, but yeah, it's pretty much just all I've witnessed was just the benches being covered.
That's a really good example, right? And so again, it goes back to the questions that we'll be responding to. You've all responded to the first one, so just write that response into your prompts. What are the permaculture design principles missing when a hostile design is implemented? Who is the intended target of hostile design? And who is impacted unintentionally by hostile design? What were your takeaways from the Crip Camp documentary? That's going to be a big one. We'll dig into that question, especially when we come back from this breakout. Why is it important not to assume you know your stakeholders' interests? What role did policy and advocacy play in achieving design inclusion for people with disabilities? All right, so I'm going to put on some music for you all to respond to those prompts, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Let's say at 7 o'clock, we'll be back. Before I put the music on, does anyone have any questions?
Are we submitting this on Canvas?
Yes.
Okay. Are you creating an assignment, I'm assuming?
There is one published right now. It's entitled Universal Design with You in Mind. And so you should be able to submit it there.
Universal design. Wow.
No worries. No
Grammarly makes
worries.
communication at work one click simpler. Whether you're looking for an
It's under week 9 assignments.
Oh, I see it. Okay, thank you.
All right, so we should be wrapping up. Let me know if you're still working on your assignment.
Professor Hampton.
Yes, hey Paige.
Hi, I had having issues with my connection, but I just was able to finally log in. What are we just doing the in-class questions?
Yes,
Okay.
I'll give folks another minute, and Paige, you'll have time to work on it, you know, to catch up. So don't worry
Thank you.
about that.
Okay, thank you.
Give me a thumbs up if you are done. All right, I'll give folks a couple of more minutes. All right, let everybody start coming back and we'll share out what we have. I really am interested in hearing your takeaways from the Crip Camp documentary. So with that said, I will go ahead and call on Nowie to kick us off. What were your big takeaways from the Crip Camp documentary? Hey, Nowie, are you there with us? Let's go. Okay, let's start it off this way then. Raise your hand if you watched the documentary. I see a couple of people watched it. Anybody else watch it? Let's go to you then, Joshua.
Yeah, one of the most important takeaways too I took from this was well, like two things. First, the camp itself, where the counselor, I mean, to me it seemed like an ordinary camp, or like how like a regular summer camp would run. and how the counselors how they treated their like the disabled community like as if they were their own. Like they weren't too much like they weren't like babysitters. Like they weren't too much to like be like overprotective and stuff like that. They just let them like kids be kids. Just let them like they treated them like as they should be, like as part of like their own without like kind of like excluding because well like in the camp like they had more like social interaction through like recreational activity through like baseball or like even like in some social gatherings too where like they were all where they all came together and just talked about like some like maybe everyday hobbies, but mostly like some concerns or like issues they had with like their parents to society. And like I mean their counselors too were just like very open to them. And like the other one too were like when they had to make changes to like push for the 504 act. Like I think even one of the campers said too in the documentary that that they had to put themselves out there, like they had to make themselves more like recognizable because otherwise if they don't then like I mean society's just gonna keep on going forward without them. And if I mean, even if they do pass this law and without, but like, if there's no like, how you say it? Like, there's not some kind of like, like, if they didn't really push forward for like public opinions or something like that, then like, just the law itself is like meaningless. It doesn't really make any difference if they didn't like thrive to make a change or make themselves noticed to society. So they really had to go through to like make sure like they get these same rights as like anyone else in the world.
Yeah, Josh. Thank you for uplifting that. One, just calling out their experience in the camp. It was really powerful to just experience people living with disabilities in a space that we take for granted, right? Just treated like humans. And I think what was really interesting about that is the power of the the community that was highlighted. It was very powerful to see how insightful they were of what they were going through and how much wisdom they provided to those who didn't have that experience on what it was like. And like you mentioned, it was also very powerful to see them self-advocate, right? And protest, lay out in the middle of the street, take up elected people's offices and make sure that they achieve the progress, which eventually became many laws, but one in particular, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those efforts would not have been done if people with lived experience weren't at the table. And specifically with people living with disabilities, it is a big part of their experience, how they experience the built environment, right? Landscape, public spaces, and a lot of the challenges that they were bringing about, spanning back the 1960s and 70s and so on and so forth, all of this advocacy that was going on, a lot of the challenges are still being realized today. And so
Yeah,
thank you again for sharing that, Josh.
yeah, and like one more thing too, because they even mentioned too, because like even if they did pass those regulations, like in the first place, they would have like even the challenge that you mentioned too, like the government would have to make like so many changes to like their economy and stuff like that, which costs like billions and billions of dollars. And like who knows like what's like like what's the perimeter, like what like where does this out, like does this influence like all the states in the country or like that was just like a main concern.
Yeah, questions
Yeah.
that need answers for sure. And there are definitely still implications of that as far as who foots the bill, many small business owners who are trying to retrofit their sites so that they are more ADA compliant need funds to do that, right? It takes money to make design changes. And so with that being said, what does it look like? What is the economic impact of, making these design considerations or design changes to locations that traditionally have not been inclusive as it relates to ADA compliant design practices? So yeah, thank you again, Josh. I believe Ricardo had his hand up. Was that you, Ricardo, that held it down with the watching of the crib camp?
Yeah, I also watched it, and it was honestly a great form of introducing some form of equality, although there's still way much more work to do about that. But having a whole camp dedicated to, just people with disability is a great start. And I honestly enjoyed how, what Joshua said about how they viewed each other as, like without their disability, didn't treat themselves the same. And I believe, if I remember, they were also joking about it, which I thought was kind of interesting as well. But it was just an overall great documentary about, you don't really hear about that often. And it also that I was also found interesting that because of that, or after that, that's when the whole ADA Act started, and people with disability didn't have access to many things.
I believe the first time I watched the documentary was the first time I realized that the folks who fought for ADA compliance were people who experienced disabilities. I didn't realize that. Well, I don't know what I thought, right? But it makes sense in it that most people who are experiencing inequity have to find the capacity, the power to speak up, to feel like they should be seen when they're not being seen, to feel like they should be heard when they're not being heard, and to feel like they should have access when they're not currently receiving access. You have to speak up. And it was a really powerful testament to know a lot of the things that we take for granted have been fought for in blood, right? People really fought, bled, sweat, tears, cried, all of the above to ensure that, folks living with disabilities are able to access the resources that they need to thrive. The idea of people experiencing disabilities being independent, that was a big part of it, right? Do they need to be dependent? Not everyone experiencing disabilities needs to have, a guardian, and giving them agency to make their own decisions, to have employment, to have a home and take care of it with the proper accommodations that they need is super, super important. And it shouldn't be something that they should have to fight their whole life for. It should be something that is guaranteed. And again, with the traditional ways that we've built our built environment, it has not been inclusive of people experiencing disabilities. And so we'll talk a little bit about that more as the lecture goes on today. But I do want to give space for anyone else who had watched the documentary or who wants to connect it to the reading.
So I didn't get to watch the documentary in full, but I did realize that I had seen part of that documentary before, and I had heard a lot about it before as well. But I thought it was just really cool how this camp actually was like, it created this sense of like liberation for these people, and made them feel included. And I also thought that, especially during that time, during the 60s, the 60s and 70s, when a lot of people were kind of, the youth was kind of revolting and coming to a new age, that the the disabled people were also able to come out on their own and form these, it's like a form of activism, which is exactly what it was activism for them. And in almost like the sense of like you know, kind of like in the punk era, like a lot of like disruption through like disruption and like disobedience. They kind of came up like that. So it's like, I think it's cool, you know, when the youth kind of come together like that, and you know, they include themselves, and you know, they're trying to get exactly what they deserve, you know, which is accessibility. Which, like, why does that, why does that have to limit anyone? But you know, I didn't get a chance to watch it just because I'm incredibly, you know, I'm not going to talk about why, but um I am definitely going to watch it in full, because now I remember, and it did leave a strong positive impact on me.
It's
But
it's
yeah,
definitely it's definitely a powerful documentary.
yeah,
It's
for
one of the
sure.
most informative, mind-blowing ones that I've watched in the most recent years for sure. I
Yeah.
feel like I watched it probably like 2 or 3 years ago, and
Mhm.
it's just been a big part of my advocacy as far as in the built environment, as a really critical component. And so, yeah, definitely want to be mindful of that. And one more question I want to dig into before we move on with the lecture. Why is it important not to assume you know your stakeholders' interests, and what are some examples of identifying, what are some examples of ways you can identify your stakeholders' interests? Let's go to you, Jesus.
Um, it is important because stakeholders do not generally know what the interests of the citizens are. Um, they also don't fully understand firsthand the struggles and the needs of neighborhoods, and um, not just that, but also if let's say if we stay quiet and we don't let our stakeholders know what we want within our communities, you know, again, they won't really understand and know um what per se like fix around, and I think even ADA compliance within our neighborhoods is one of the big things that oftentimes goes missed.
Mhm.
But you know, I think it's something that should strongly be enforced, although, you know, there's like building codes and ADA compliance code, you know, already being implemented. Sometimes I feel like, you know, it could be enforced more rather than.
Yes. I do want to dig in on the way that we are talking about stakeholders in this conversation. So stakeholders are any group that's impacted by your landscape site, right? So these are people who could be uh, developing it or trying to develop on it. It could be residents who use it. It could be, you know, again, the environment, right? Native flora and fauna. Um, the way that I want you all to see your role as landscape architects developing a landscape intervention is more as the stakeholder manager, right? Where you are trying to understand all of the stakeholders' interests who are impacted by the site you're looking at, and what is the most optimal design intervention that you can introduce with those considerations.
I think I have one take on the stakeholders. I think maybe, for example, someone like me who hasn't been in the city for too long decides that, okay, I think that, you know, putting a park or putting this kind of place where people can come together and hang out is a good idea, right? And
Mhm.
I don't consider maybe the people who have lived here their entire lives, right? For example, and what if I'm, you know, excluding a certain part of history maybe for them? So the reason I say this is because I'm talking about uh God, it's the mall over here in downtown on Main Street, right across the street from City Hall. It has those like brick curved, they're
Are
like
you
these
talking
brick
about the
curved,
LA Mall?
the LA Mall, yeah. So I'm talking about the LA Mall. So for example, I think I studied it a little bit, and one thing that they missed was inclusion of the history of what used to be in that property. The only thing that they put that signals towards whatever used to be there was just 3 plaques that kind of get lost in like the midst of it all. And I know that that park was supposed to include people, you know, and they built the bridge so that they can connect these 2 sides of the parks, and it's supposed to be an area for you know, a civil gathering and communities. But I think, yeah, maybe you never know who the people who have been here the long, you know, how they would feel about, you know, a removal or an application of a new area, or, you know, putting roads through a park, or you know, how that might affect, you know,
No,
a
that's a great
pre-existing
example.
community, I think.
That's a really great example, like naming the site's history and incorporating that history in the way that the current site exists. That's a powerful way to, you know, pay homage to what used to be in the space where what is now what exists. So thanks for
Yeah,
sharing that.
homage.
Vivian, let's go to you. And the question is, why is it important not to assume your stakeholders' interests? And then how do you go about identifying what those interests are? What are some examples? Vivian, if you're not ready, we'll go to someone else. Just give me a sign in the chat. And then Catherine, we'll go to you in the meantime. Vivian, I got your message. Just go ahead and type your response in the chat and I'll read it out loud. Catherine, if you could jump in.
Yeah, I think with stakeholders, I always think of developers or the city planners or city councils that come up with the designs. And I guess sometimes it is important to know their interests, but I guess it should come down to the people who the design is about as far as what they need. And maybe the stakeholders don't always know what they need. I guess in terms of community engagement, a lot of times we see that firms or the cities give 3 different examples of a plan instead of giving free range ideas. And they think that it gives the residents, who are also stakeholders, an idea of what they want for their design, but really it does limit maybe some of their visions that they have.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine. I really appreciate you bringing up the local officials, the electeds, the local government, right? There's different ways that those considerations can be identified within the government space. So that is a great example. And I think that that's one of the critical stakeholders to have an understanding of their interests, right? And so we talk a lot about policy windows in this class. And so the local government will let you know what the policy window is for your design intervention. There are certain policy constraints. We talked about policy constraints that you need to be mindful of. So Catherine, that's a perfect example. And for all of you, be mindful of the policy window, the local policy window, as a vision alignment. You brought up something else, Catherine, is the community. Those 2 stakeholder groups are the most important stakeholder groups to your design intervention considerations. What is the community vision? What is the policy window, right? And oftentimes the policy window is going to be an existing policy project, maybe, that you can pull in the conversation into, or let's say zoning restrictions, any type of permitting requirements that are associated with the type of project that you want to do. Are there any site requirements as far as how tall your build can be, right? Those considerations need to be clearly understood, and those go into your policy constraints. The community's vision, again, is what is centered, right? You want to center your project around the community's vision and try to achieve the most optimal community vision outcome within the policy constraint, within the financial constraint, within the environmental constraints, within the design constraint, right? You can't omit the constraints. You have to be mindful of them, be considerate of them, and develop a design within that. So thanks again, Catherine, for sharing that example. Juan, we'll go to you and then we'll move on after.
Yeah, is it the same question of the stakeholders'
Yes.
interest?
Yes.
Why? I think that like they just might not simply have the same point of view as what you think that they might want to have in the area. Like let's say you were able to propose something, but they are totally against what you're proposing just due to their background or to things that they're not able to have access to.
This is true. One of the videos we watched last week, it was a quick clip on coming up with design concepts. And one of the most effective ways to develop what you want to be thinking about and developing your concept around is your client's vision, right? And so, yes, you have to be within the policy constraints of the policy window. You have to be within the constraints of the design and the environmental constraints. With the community's vision, that's going to be a critical moral compass that you develop. And you'll have to incorporate it sometimes non-verbally in a sense, but making sure that it's aligned to, these other peripheral stakeholders' needs. But again, you want to be able to communicate what the client's vision is and be responsive to it. And sometimes the client may not have the consideration of knowledge that you have as far as the different stakeholders in the landscape. So you can support the client's vision by introducing those concepts, but ensuring that it is aligned with what the client is trying to achieve. But that's going to be sometimes a difficult challenge to do, Juan. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because asking the right questions allow you to develop that framework around, okay, this is what my client needs in regards to the types of plants. They're looking for color. Okay, well, I know that it's important to do sustainable development around landscaping. So let's make sure that we do some drought tolerant California native species with color, right? And identify how you can accommodate the client's vision within the scope of your values, permaculture design principles, and be able to articulate that value in a way that's aligned to the client's interest, right? And this is, again, another reason why it's important to know what your client's interests are, because when you're trying to introduce things that are environmentally conscious or, drought tolerant or community centered, those may not be the values that your client is leading with. So you want to make sure that you're able to frame your sustainable, equitable, inclusive considerations in a way that's aligned with your client's value. You have to speak your client's language. Thumbs up on that?
Yeah.
I see a couple. Okay, all right. Just seeing if y'all still up with me out there. All right, so let's get back into our presentation. Let's see. Boom. Send. Let's see. Boom. Let's go. I don't see it. All right, so we went over these questions. We talked about some of these design components, right? Y'all talked about this and the things that you all have experienced in the built environment related to your experiences. These spikes on the different surfaces to prevent skateboarders, these backless seats that encourage folks not to sit for long, these modified seating designs that discourage homeless people from finding places to rest. These are all different ways that we experience hostile design in the built environment. And it's a really interesting thing to be aware of, because some of you all who may not have noticed it before may see this more frequently now that we've discussed it in class. As designers, you will again be a part of what this can look like in the future. And then also, you know, just again, being mindful of those constraints that you have to be aware of, whether it be for your client or different stakeholders, but be aware of what you are doing and the intentionality behind it. Because what is most important, and this is a way that you can push up against hostile design, is universal design principles, right? And so it's important, and you all read this in the assigned reading, that universal design principles mean that your design is equitable for use, flexible in use, simple and intuitive in use, perceptible information, it's tolerant of errors, low physical effort, size and space for approach and use, right? So these are the universal design principles all of your design should be mindful of. And again, if you're developing something new, you should make sure that it has all those considerations. So what does it look like to be equitable in use? It means that the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. If it's flexible in use, it means that the design accommodates a wide range of individuals' preferences and abilities. Simple intuitive use means that the use of the design is easy to understand, regardless of users' experience, knowledge, language, skills, or education level. Perceptible information, it means that the design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or the user's sensory abilities. Tolerance of error, this means that the design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended action. Low physical effort, the design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with minimal fatigue. And last, the seventh principle is size and space for approach and use. Appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use regardless of users' body size and posture or mobility. So I'm gonna just have a couple of you share with hostile design, what are some of the components that you feel are being impeded on in relation to universal design principles? What is not present in hostile design when we're looking at universal design principles? Ryan, I'm gonna have you write it in the chat, but I'm going to go to Hermilo. And then I'm gonna go to Giselle.
All right. What is the question again? Do you mind
The
repeating?
question is, based off of what we talked about related to hostile design, we watched the video, we shared examples of our personal experiences related to it. What are some universal design principles that are missing from hostile design practices?
Well, I don't know.
So these are the examples that we are looking at as far as universal design.
Maybe space.
Space. That's a great choice, Hermilo. What comes to mind for you in the example of space that hostile design doesn't allow?
Well, in numbers, And number 7, it seems to me that the person discussion right there it doesn't have, or it seems that it's not uh, big enough for him to cross. And I'm not sure what's going on with the person standing next to it. I think it may be, I don't know what's going on in the conversation. So,
Well, this is an example of size and space being sufficient. It shows that there's a marker here showing its ADA access. And so this was widened, right? But like, if we go back to some of these examples, there's some disparities in relation to access. And we'll probably see more as this lecture goes on. But that's a great example, size and space. Who else wants to share one? Let's go to you, Giselle.
I would say, I don't know if this is a reach, but I would say tolerance for error, since
Nice.
these designs are like built specifically with obstacles and limitations. So the benches are nothing but benches. Like there's no way you can use it for anything else you might intend to use it for.
That's a perfect example. Tolerance for error and size. Hermilo and Giselle, those are some amazing examples. In relation to size, the video we watched earlier talked about how many hostile design takes space away, right? In these examples that we see here, we see that right here, there's a seat going, right? Like there's a third person that can sit on this bench, but because of hostile design, there's only 2 people that can sit here now. And so this is an example of size, space and size being removed from the built environment to facilitate hostile design, and how that goes against universal design principles. And again, as Giselle mentioned, tolerance for error, especially with, like, let's say those surface treatments, folks who have wheelchairs or who have a hard time walking, like elderly folks, that shift and change in surface could be detrimental. And if they're not prepared for it and make an error, it makes them more prone to injury and accidents. And so again, thank you both for sharing those examples. Hostile design is not universal design, and it's not effective as it relates to any of those, especially for size, space, and tolerance for error. Right now, we're going to watch a 5-minute video so that we can look at ways that we can create a base map for our landscape projects. I think this is going to be a great example exercise for you all to see. And then we'll go into the rest of the lecture. This is going to be a critical component you all need to know. You'll have access to the lecture, but you will need to identify your site and print out a base map for your landscape. So check it out.
With Localscapes. And in this video, we're going to teach you how to create a base map for your property using Google Maps. To accurately plan landscape projects, you must first get the layout, measurements, and dimensions of your property. Google Maps is a great way to do this because it allows us to not only get those dimensions, but also locate real-world elements such as existing trees without having to go outside and measure anything. To get started, go to maps.google.com. Then type in your property address in the search bar in the top left corner. Once you've located the property, zoom in. In the bottom left corner, we can switch between the map view and the satellite view as needed. The map view is the easiest way to measure the property, but satellite view will come in handy when it comes time to measuring the actual house outline, as well as the real-world elements. For now, we'll start with the map view. The first thing you want to do is print a copy of the map view so that you can write your measurements directly on your map. To do this, right-click and it will bring up a submenu where you can select Print. Once you've printed a copy of the map, you want to right-click on the front right corner of our property and select Measure Distance from the submenu. This will create a starting point for the measurement. If the starting point isn't exactly where you want it, click on it and drag it around as needed. Once you have the point set, click on the back right corner of the property to create your second point. Now we have our first measurement. At the bottom of the screen, you can see a box that shows the total distance between the 2 points. but you can also see this total on your map next to your second point. This measurement isn't going to be perfectly accurate as it is just an estimate, so go ahead and round up or down as needed. It's okay if you're off a foot or two in your measurements, as it will be easy to adjust later, but be sure to write down each measurement on the printed map as we go along. Now, if you just go to the next point and click, it's going to give you an accumulative measurement, which is not what we want. So make sure that you're measuring each side of the property. Just click and drag the points to where you need them to measure the second side individually. Once you have the points where you need them, you can see the distance at the bottom of the screen, or again, next to the second point in your measurement. Be sure to write down the measurement of each side as you go through them. If you accidentally clear the measurement points, simply right-click and select Measure Distance again to choose new points. Once you have all of the measurements of each side of your property, right-click and in the submenu select Clear Measurement. The next thing we want to do is measure the actual house. To measure the house, we recommend that you switch to the satellite view because the map view has a very simplified shape of the house and it may not be very accurate. To switch to satellite view, click the box in the bottom left-hand corner, then right-click and select Measure Distance. This time, set your first point at the back corner of the house and your second point at the opposite back corner to measure the back side of the house. Continue to measure each side individually and be sure to write down the measurement of each side on your printed base map. Once you've measured each side of the house, the last thing you want to do is determine measurements from the house to the property line or existing elements. If you're measuring from the corner of the house to the property line, it can be tempting to measure from the corner of the house to the corner of the property. The problem with this is that it may not be a straight line, and in this program, we really have no way to determine the correct angle. As a result, the best way to determine these measurements accurately is to go straight from the side of the house to the property line at a 90-degree angle and write that measurement down. Then measure from that point to the corner of the property line and write that down. This will ensure that we have accurate measurements and that we are using the correct angles. To measure existing elements, such as trees, set your first point at the center of the tree, then measure from there to the side of the property. You can then measure from that point to the corner of the property and give yourself a pretty good idea of where that tree sits in relation to the rest of the landscape. In the bottom right-hand corner of the map, there is a view rotation setting which may help you see certain areas or elements better if you rotate your view around. If you have too much tree coverage, this technique may not work well for you, and you may have to do some measuring by hand. But it's still important to ensure you have all your needed measurements on your base map before you start your project. Once you have all of your measurements, you'll need to transfer them to a larger piece of paper so that you have a base map that's large enough to draw on. An easy way to do this is using graph paper and a scale of 1 square equals 1 foot. This is also a great time to make a few copies in case you want to change your plans later. Remember, every good landscape begins with a plan, and every good plan begins with a base map.
All right, so that was a quick video on using Google Maps to create a landscape base map. And with that, we'll go into surveying for physical accessibility. And we're using the map of the Ascot Hills Park site. As you can see, I highlighted the areas that we visited. This is the outside amphitheater. This here is the bioswale. This here is the Zanha Lake water source. And this right here is the area for the native species rehabilitation. So when you're surveying a site for physical accessibility, you want to conduct a survey to identify accessibility barriers, brainstorm ways in which barriers may be eliminated, and ways in which environments may be made more universally accessible. You want to estimate of cost and time and resources involved in removing barriers and enhancing access, prioritize projects and apply universal design principles to barrier removal efforts, Develop time frame, implement the plan, and review it periodically. So those are the components that you need to be mindful for surveying a site for physical accessibility. Many of you identified accessibility as a site problem here. So that is one of the potential design interventions you all can consider. Any site outside of Ascot Hills, any other site we visit, or any site that you have visited this semester can also be used for this type of surveying. You want to be thinking of it in this way. Guidelines and principles for creating an accessible outdoor space. You want to make sure it's accessible, informed, comfortable, ecological, predictable, multisensory, and traversable. And so this right here is an example of a site layout. It breaks down the landscape in the different landscape areas on this site, different entryways, locations where different types of trees are located. And so when you're talking about your design and developing a concept for your design, when you're looking at a site, you want to kind of have not necessarily this detailed layout, but a conceptual breakdown of what this can look like. Key areas to consider when landscaping your space for optimal accessibility and experience. You want to think about the parking lot entrance, parking lot design. You want to be thinking about a disability first principle. Think about your pathway designs. They should be intricate, but at the same time, traversable, right? Easy to maneuver through, low barriers to pathways, no type of, any type of barriers for folks who may be using wheelchairs or any type of ADA equipment. You also want to be mindful of hardscapes, outdoor hardscape areas, practical ways to create accessible spaces. So for example, there may be a site like Ascot Hills where you realize like, hey, you know, the whole park will not be accessible. But with that in mind, what are some features you can create for accessible spaces, right? For folks who may not be able to experience other areas of the park. Pathway lighting, that's going to be a critical one, especially as it relates to nighttime, accessing sites at night. What parts of the landscape will be hardscapes and what will be more natural. Hardscapes really comes in when we're talking about accessibility, different ramps, railings, and different fun features and interactive elements, especially when you're talking about sites that are for families with children. You want to make sure that there's different features for fun and interactions. So parking lot, right? Exterior accessibility route and parking. You want to make sure that when you're landscaping a site, you're being mindful of how your site is accessed from the parking lot. Are there entry points at the parking lot? Are those entry points accessible for folks with disabilities? Are there sidewalk entry points? Is there parking that is situated at an accessible distance for people with the disabilities? And what are the different measurements, right? Spacing. Hermelo gave a great example earlier as far as that being a universal design principle that's important, right? Spacing. So be mindful of that when you're talking about entry points and giving people the ability to maneuver from vehicle into site. We also talked about disability first principles, right? And so these examples show that different from hostile design, where they're making sites less accessible, when you have a disability first principle, not only does it still allow you to make a beautiful site, but it makes it accessible for everyone, right? This is a beautiful example. Folks who are able-bodied, they can take a beautiful walk around this ramp and see the beautiful landscape features, the beautiful framing of the hardscape with the landscape, natural landscape framed within it. They can see that beautiful, view, but at the same time, someone with a wheelchair can also traverse this site on their own. And the elongated pathway allows for low strain when trying to access this ramp specifically. And so another example of hardscape enhancements for accessibility are railings. So again, you see that along the railings, there's a beautiful display of landscape features, but at the same time, it has the railings for folks who may need it. So you always want to be mindful of these disability first principles. When you're thinking about ramps, you definitely want to make sure that you're adding features for low strain and easy access for folks who have different levels of ability. And so the different rise and the run of the ramp is a critical consideration. You don't want to have a ramp that's too steep where someone's trying to go up the ramp and they roll back down. And so this is an example of some of the ways that you can be mindful of that consideration, having different points in the ramp that are flat, are level, right? And perpendicular to the ground. And so parallel to the ground, excuse me. So these are examples of different disability first principles. They do not create a barrier for able-bodied folks, but they ensure access for folks with different abilities. We talked about lighting as well. And so I really like these examples of pictures that are here because the different lighting features in these sites show how they use the landscape as a way to add to the way that the light is displayed. And so the light bounces off of the trees and enhances the view of the lighting of the site, right? And so these are ways that you can use lighting with landscape to enhance the experience of lighting the pathway, increasing safety and accessibility. So another component are, again, fun features. Some of the fun features are, let's say, your site layout and design, but you also want to incorporate different sites. For example, different coloring, the different types of flora and fauna that you use. They may be able to communicate different components of site. You may have a different, like an area that attracts hummingbirds, for example, or different squirrels, different animals that, create a site feature that is only experienced there or is enhanced there based off of the features that you bring. This example here shows a courtyard design plan. It shows a pond here. It also has a few courtyards, different areas where you can sit and relax in the forested tree area. So these are different ways that they've developed the site to have some enhanced features. And then there's a kids area here, a concierge desk. All of these components are features of the site to enhance the experience. Here, this is like a sketch of a park design. There's different animals here on this site. There's a garden here that folks are playing in, and then there's also a feature where folks can sit down and eat at a bench. I really like this top left example because it really is a beautiful design. It looks accessible, but it has these very beautiful geometric features that look really cool to experience, right? Like on site, and just walking around that location and going through all the different pathways. So now that we talked about the different features of the sites and the different considerations to incorporate universal design, I want to transition to developing design precedents. We talked about so many things this semester, right? We talked about sight reading. We talked about considerations like design constraints. We talked about how to read a site in relation to different theories of change methodologies like narrative strategy. Who are the stakeholders and what are their lived experiences that we need to consider related to our design intervention. We talked about permaculture design strategies, the different values that are being considered of the individual and the environment, but also the different interests of stakeholders, being able to leverage permaculture design strategies to understand.
Professor, we don't hear you. Yeah.
All right, I'm back. My apologies about that. But as I was saying, permaculture design values and principles are helping you to ground your understanding of what the site needs, but also it helps you understand how to categorize, interpret, and align your stakeholders' interest, vision, and values, right? And so you definitely want to use the permaculture design principles for that, grounding what the site needs, as well as understanding what to prioritize related to your stakeholders' vision, values, and interests, okay? We also talked about, we will talk about more collective impact. That's the missing link that you have related to the methodologies of theories of change, but we will be getting into that in our next lecture. But be mindful of collective impact, because that goes to the stakeholders. And how do you engage the stakeholders, whether it be through research, which you all have done an extensive job in doing this semester. You've read so many books. You've also engaged many stakeholders, right? You have several government documents like the LA River Revitalization Plan, the Green New Deal, the R County Plan, and any other legislative document that's related to landscape issues can be used. That's collective impact, understanding how to leverage the vision of community to align to the policy window, and to align to interests of developers, and to align to philanthropy, and to align to academic research, right? That's collective impact. You are aligning stakeholder interests to achieve an aligned vision for what a landscape intervention should be. And so those three theories of change is what is informing what you'll be doing next. So let's get go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is there any way, or I don't know if, is this a good time that you can maybe supply the link how to use Google Maps?
That link, you're talking about the video?
Yes.
The video is in the chat. Well, the link is in the chat. It's in your lecture, right? And so this lecture is in Canvas under week 9.
Yes, I see the video, but I would like to get the link. If it's not possible, I can just watch over here.
Well, it's on YouTube, so I will put the link in the assignment page.
You can also click on that at the bottom left corner of the video where it says watch on YouTube.
Oh, and then I can get the link from there probably, huh?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank y'all. I think that was Josh. I don't know who it was, but whoever it was, thank you for the support on that. Okay, so you all should be able to see my screen. We went over all of this great stuff. We're looking now at developing design precedents, right? And so when you're developing a design precedent, you want to identify an example of your concept working, right? And so with design precedents, it's a way for you to do research on a design that you like and that you want to try to incorporate or adapt to your site. And so these are examples of different site precedents, right? And so you see the site layout, you see the side view of the building, and you see several different images. And then there's a description of what this person thought was important of the site. This right here shows different graphic images of how they would use site. This is what this is like a model of the different site usages. And so this right here shows the different site elevations and the different programs that this site is being used for. So each level has a different program. The pink shows some type of interaction that is happening there. And so it indicates the different usages of site, right? And so again, this precedent gives an example of what is influencing what this person will eventually develop in concept for their specific design that they're developing, okay? And so these all represent the ways that these students or these designers develop their design precedent. You want to, again, find images that represent different site features you want to incorporate, whether it's sustainability, whether it's different design considerations as far as geographical design modeling, different mixed usage considerations of site, right? So whatever elements you think are most important based off of the design precedent you're using, you want to bring that up not only in the images, but also in what you write on your site precedent. So this is another example of a precedent. It shows the Highland Park in New York. It shows the different materials that were selected for this site and why this person thought it was unique. The use of native drought resistant plants, the essential green roof, right? And so these are the different features of this precedent that this designer appreciated. And they showed the different ways that this site achieved the different features that they wanted to highlight, right? And so these pictures oftentimes already exist. So the precedent shouldn't require you to design any modeling for the precedent. This is more of identifying pictures on the precedent design that you would like to incorporate in your concepts. And then again, writing out text to describe why that feature is important to your consideration in your site intervention. So I also wanted to give some examples of student projects. I recently did a seminar for some projects in another class, and I really liked these assignments, and they really spoke to what I feel I want to see from your final projects, which will be group assignments. And so you all will be getting the directions for that by the time that I upload the YouTube video for this lecture. And it'll be a group assignment. And we've been talking again a lot about developing considerations for site and the different historical narratives of site. What are the different histories are related to the different considerations you make up of site? And so I want you all to think about this for your final project. So you will have a final writing assignment, which you all will complete individually. And then this will be a project that you'll be doing as a group. You'll do a design precedent of your site. You'll break down the site background, or you can either do a site background or a demographic breakdown, however you want to communicate that. And then you want to introduce your concept or your design intervention with your narrative concept for background and demographic kind of considerations, right? And so you all know the different considerations you need to make around policy constraints and so on and so forth. So your assignment will break that down, but I wanted to give you all some visuals of how you can start thinking of building out your concept. So this student talked about the history of Alhambra. They did somewhat of a timeline, the different communities that were represented in this site or this community. So for you, it would be site. But there are site histories. We talked about that in Site Matters and many of the other readings about the importance of having site stories. And I think someone gave an example today about, yeah, it was you, Edgar, the LA Mall, and how that park doesn't connect the history and the narrative of history of what used to be there. And so that's going to be a big part of what you need to be mindful of for your projects. The demographic, understanding like the different community stakeholders, different considerations of who's represented in that community, however you want to represent that, right? Your site may be more focused on businesses versus residents or homeless people or whatever, right? But like, who are the stakeholders? So we've talked about stakeholders being community residents, community-based organizations like the ones that we've talked to this semester. We've talked to Northeast Trees. We also talked to landscape architects and contractors, right? And then hopefully we'll talk to some community-based organizations that work with people experiencing homelessness, as well as community-based organizations that work with street vendors. So these type of community-based organizations represent stakeholders. We also talk about the electeds. You all can reach out to an elected if you like, but you do have access to the research, right? The different documents that are being developed by the city and the county related to different, green space initiatives. And so incorporating those kind of stakeholder considerations into your projects is going to be what is the ask, right? This student showed some different examples of the site, how it's used. I think they were talking about the New Year's Eve event and the parade that happens and how it was moved from one location to another, a smaller location. They talked about the different stakeholders through businesses and temples and churches that are very prevalent in the Alhambra area. And then they gave a concept sketch of how the street can be taken over and used fully for the parade, and maybe even potentially taken over permanently where it's fully for pedestrian usage and like street vending and things of that nature. They also talked to community members. So this is like their assignment was a graphic novel. So they had to develop a graphic novel. You all will have to be creative and really just spell out the narrative of who the stakeholders are and then how that relates to your landscape intervention. So your creativity is definitely going to be around communicating who the stakeholders are, but more so how that then relates to your landscape intervention, which is just going to be your concept build. Okay. And so these students, again, identify some folks who represented the Alhambra community and got their narratives to understand, you know, the different things that they wanted to see in their community. So this wasn't a landscape intervention assignment for them. This was more like a site research assignment. You all will be introducing a concept for a landscape intervention based off of the research we've conducted throughout this semester. This is another awesome example. This is probably one of my favorite examples of the student projects. This student these students developed the concept for Skid Row. They addressed the housing crisis, and they were developing a concept around the history of Skid Row in the region and how it transitioned into a place where the majority of the folks in the city experiencing homelessness lived there. They talked about the demographic disparities in relation to Black people being 40% of the demographic of folks experiencing homelessness, but only 8% of the demographic of the city as a whole. And so that was a big disparity there. The tent life, they broke down this example of how people use their tents just like we use our homes. And so this is like a graphic of the concept of using a tent like we would use our homes. They also showed the space relationship, and then showed like a zoom in vision of what you would see typically inside of a tent. They developed the concept of the solar study and the climate impact of Skid Row related to it being a heat island and how it's impacted by heat at different times of the year. They also identified infrastructure that they felt were relevant to this demographic. So that was a really interesting concept of site, identifying where the needs were being addressed for people experiencing homelessness. They had a concept to develop an art gallery inside of a park that was focused for people experiencing frequented, or people who were experiencing homelessness oftentimes congregated there. And so they wanted to develop a park that had an art gallery. And so there was some pushback on that, right? Like this idea that if you called it an art gallery, it may gentrify the space. But if you called it something more relevant or resonant to the local community, it will probably, one, make it more personal for the folks using it, but also not attract folks who it's not actually for. And so that goes back to like the names that you develop for your sites. Like who is your site for? Name it for them, right? And so that was interesting. Another concept they developed was this idea of reclaiming the street. A lot of the areas in downtown LA that are in Skid Row oftentimes are they are not frequented by folks who aren't experiencing homelessness. So they were talking about this concept of claiming the street, right? And claiming more space for the folks experiencing homelessness. And so they wanted to push the accessibility out more into the street and claim that for more areas for people to take up with the tents. And so they had a tent concept, some space that they were claiming not only for tents, but also for recreation, like eating, some tables there, picnic tables, and then also an introduction of soft barriers with trees, right? And so again, I really, really like this idea because it was very thorough and it was very consistent with a target demographic, a specific issue that they were addressing, a site that they were focusing their intervention on, as well as a beautiful, simple concept that wasn't like crazy design, but built out enough so that you can see it. Like this was one of my favorites. Another example was student talked about hi-fi, so Filipino town, historic Filipino town. And so they, created this really cool graphic art where it identified the site, and then they did a collage of the different stakeholders in the historic Filipino town, specifically the business owners, and specifically these three businesses: Dollar Hits, Little Ongpin, and then Hi-Fi Kitchen. And so they did a profile on each of these businesses and got clarity on their story, the different challenges they experienced in regards to accessing resources to stay open, the different permitting challenges they experienced in regards to their like traditional food preparation and selling practices versus what the local city allows. And then they talked about the fight to organize for Hi-Fi, right? The different work that went in to designate Hi-Fi into a community development corporation, well, in partnership with the Community Development Corporation, and really the work that went into that. So it was a really interesting project, really awesome concept. They identified stakeholders and they did a profile on them, and then they had interventions that were more, let's say, policy focused, which was really great. Some of those were design focused, like different equipment needs that these businesses had, but some of them needed funding, right? Cash flow, impacts from COVID, things of that nature they were able to speak to. This project was really awesome as well. These students talked about the African-American community of Lamar Park. They talked about the Great Migration in two waves, in the early 1900s and then more so in the mid 1900s, and the changes in migration patterns throughout the year. This is a community of LA that is, I believe they said 70% Black, which is very profound in a city that's only 8% Black overall. And so that's the interesting part about like policies like redlining. They really did push Black people into these enclaves, which are what we cherish now. We want to keep those communities with Black residents, especially because a lot of residents in LA that are Black are being pushed out, right, displaced. And so these traditional Black neighborhoods are oftentimes holding on to efforts to own property. And this project talked about the ways that different business owners collaborated together to buy back the block. And so one of the questions they asked some of the folks they interviewed was, were they afraid of the gentrification because of the Destination Crenshaw efforts? And for those that don't know about Destination Crenshaw, it's about a couple of miles of public art. It's like outside public art by local LA artists, and you will be able to see it when you get on the new Metro line going through the Crenshaw area, which is the new Metro line that connects you to LAX. And so when they started to develop this concept around developing the Metro line in this South LA community that has historically been disenfranchised, it automatically created, fear of gentrification. But again, many of the residents and business owners work together to buy up a lot of the businesses and the property on the street. And so now a lot of that property is owned by Black property owners. And that's one of the ways that they fought back against gentrification, by becoming property owners. And so this is an example of their project and how they talked about the history of this area, the history of this area, not only as it pertains to Black folks, but the opportunity was also to call in the history of this area as it relates to the Japanese community, right? And so the history of this area, it's named after a white man named Lamert, and it was historically an area that was exclusive for white people, right? And so one of the things that happened when Black folks came over to the West Coast is there were so many Black folks, and they originally moved all to Watts, my family included. Many of the folks who are African American and migrated during these particular times, they either came to LA or went to Oakland. And so my family came into LA, lived in Watts, and after the Watts riots, which was in 1965, my grandmother made my grandfather move from LA, threatening that she would move back to Texas, and they ended up moving to San Diego, where I eventually was born. So this is an example of this migration pattern and the connection that many folks who migrated from the South to the West Coast have to the LA area. The history of that then is the displacement that folks are experiencing. A few weeks ago, there was some very horrible news of 3 council members making very anti-Black racist comments and organizing to gerrymander the Black vote, the Black voter block, and to disenfranchise Black wealth and Black voter power. And that was earth-shattering, especially in a city that is doing a lot to address inequity, but at the same time has so much more to do. And that audio in particular really spoke to that. But it really is a very scary thing to know that some of the top electeds in the city were organizing to disenfranchise folks, and they were using a lot of anti-Black rhetoric that was aligned to policies like redlining. We read a lot of the redlining documents earlier in this semester, and one of the things I pointed out was this concept of proximity to Blackness, and how within redlining policy, if you were a person of Jewish descent or Italian descent, you were considered low class if you lived next to Black folks. If you were, let's say, in the suburbs, you were just Italian, you were just Jewish, you were just Irish. But if you lived in the Black community, you were a low class, whatever, fill in the blank. And you also saw the association of Blackness where they grouped all other minorities separately from what they used to refer to back then, Negro, Black people as Negro. And so this rhetoric, especially given the audio that was released, is still a big influence on the way decisions are made. And the proximity to Blackness was spoke on because many of the folks on the video were talking about electeds in their relationship to Black electeds. And some of these electeds were Latino, and it was like, he's with the Blacks, or, one of these electeds has a Black son, and they were disparaging him because of his Black son, right? And so for me as a Black person, it was really speaking to this proximity of Blackness and this anti-Black rhetoric that not only Black people experience, but anti-Blackness, I feel, is foundational to how people relate to whiteness in America. And similar to what I was saying, many folks who are, prejudiced or discriminatory in the Black community sometimes use their citizenship as a way to approximate their self to whiteness. And not all brown people are immigrants, right? And so these conversations sometimes are very complex to have and very nuanced, but they're necessary to have. And even our immigrant brothers and sisters are human. They need access to resources. They're a big part of our communities. And it isn't right for anyone to be disenfranchised, especially within the context of institutional racism and institutional oppression. Again, these examples really not only identified stakeholders, it identified historical context as well as narratives and how they related to a proposed or not proposed intervention. So these are the assignments that I wanted to share with you all today, but I'm gonna stop sharing right now and open it up for questions.
So just in concern with design presidents. So really it's mostly about kind of like taking inspiration from like maybe like some current or like some past sites with some like certain design elements that could influence our like that could bring some influence to our what we're working on.
Correct. That is exactly right, Josh. So in some of the previous assignments, you have identified precedents. I provided a few links for I think it's Association for Study of Landscape Architecture. I don't know. It's ASLA, right? That site.
Yeah.
My mind is going blank. It's late in the day. But that link will give you access to a bunch of precedents, but you can go outside of that, right? You could keep it local, right? Identify some regional precedents for what you want to intervene, but you should consider all the research that we've done, right? For example, when Brandy Williams was here, one of our guest speakers, Brandy Williams was here, they talked about us living in a Mediterranean climate, right?
Right.
You identify different sites and resources for the different types of plants to consider for site, right? The ones that are drought tolerant, California friendly, California natives. And there were also some examples of how to introduce, let's say, invasive species like succulents in a way that is sustainable for site, like putting them in bins, right? And so there's different examples of how you can introduce interventions in multiple ways, right? And so you want to start developing your what type of sites you want to do an intervention on in partnership with your partner. You got to identify a partner, and then you want to develop a design precedent, and then you want to start developing your final project. So I'll be sending the directions for that. It'll be a precedent, and then you'll be using the design precedent because I'm going to give you a template. It's an InDesign template. And you'll be using that to, incorporate the precedent, but then all of the other components of your final project, right? So the stakeholders, the background, and then stakeholders' interests related to your intervention. Like you propose your intervention and you communicate how that effectively aligns with your stakeholders' vision and values. And so again, that will be your group project, and you will get that within the next few days. And then next week, I will assign you your final writing assignment, which will be individual.
Okay, thank you.
Who's excited about doing a design precedent? Who's scared? Okay, so some scared people. Okay, so the excited people get with the scared people and then have a party. Okay, excited people, show us who you are again. No one's excited anymore. So the cool thing is that you all should be upper division architecture students, right? Like third and fourth year. I think there's only one first year here, but all of you should be third and fourth year, correct? Maybe even a grad student or two. So with that being said, you all have done design precedents before, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not hard, right? I'm gonna give you, I'm giving you the template. And so with InDesign, you're really just uploading the, let me show you the template that it is. Download. Yeah, you're just uploading your photos that you want, and then you write a text on why you wanted that photo there, right? So I will be providing the directions as well as an updated template for your InDesign project. And so you all, again, will work together to develop your precedent and case study. So your precedent is the history of your like design interest, and your case study is site specific, the different considerations that you're thinking of related to your site, and then it's your design intervention. So boom, let's see, boom, I'm gonna share my screen. Sharing my screen. You should see my screen. So boom, all of the things are laid out here. Case study, project name, you insert all of that information, and then you get to plug and play all the fun stuff. Key image, full 2-page spread, boom. Team members, section, chapter number, if you're referencing that, and you're good, right? So boom, image, case study, project name, you have your text outs right here. It's pretty easy, isn't it? Isn't this easy? Takeaways, connections, the titles, it's all here. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, like most of it seems kind of straightforward.
Kind
right?
of.
So this is gonna be your saving grace. And outside of that, all you gotta do is be creative and thoughtful, right? This template is gonna help you order your thoughts. You wanna kind of have like your cover page here with the information that you want, and then you get into the concepts of your site that you want to dig in. So like we talked about, finding that Google image, doing the different measurements, and then identifying the different interventions you want to propose for the site. These are all the ways that you can do that. You want to do it on this document. Then stop here. Let's see. This is your analysis. So you'll be able to do the, you'll use this document. I'll update the headers here, but you'll be using this one for your precedent. You'll identify the different precedents and the different components of that precedent that you found valuable. So what I'll be doing, again, before I set up your, put up this video for this class, you'll have that Google Drive with all of the templates and the directions for the assignment. How many people to a group? Not everybody's in the class today, so y'all gonna have to get with your friends. But I want to do 3 people to a group because I think it'll make the assignment easier, but then I remember the nightmares I had with group projects. So my forgiveness to that. I hope you all have fun and a good experience with group projects. But I think with architecture, it could be fun. It could be fun. I've had fun with architecture group projects. I have had fun with those. I wish I had more group projects with architecture because the program that I am in, I have to do it all by myself. But it is really, really great to work in teams. The reason why I say that is because if you have a skill that, let's say, someone else in your team doesn't have, then you can prioritize your skill towards that focus in the project and let your team member focus on what their skill set is, right? So I would recommend making that happen. I want you all to reach back out to me by by tomorrow at 9 p.m. with your chosen group members. And if I don't hear from you, then I will force choose for you. Does that sound good?
We could give it a go.
Are you all concerned about finding a partner?
Well, I think just because there hasn't been too much dialogue between some of my classmates, but I mean, I'm sure I can reach out to some people. Like Jesus, maybe.
Yeah, Vivian and I would like to also partner up. So sure. Yeah, I think that's fine too.
Boom, Edgar, Vivian, and Jesus.
Yeah, found a group.
Actually, I have a question too about that layout. Can we explore with other layouts? I mean, keep it in mind,
Yes, you can explore with other layouts. What I'll be looking for are the components addressed within your assignment. The layout is more to support with capacity because I personally wish I had layout templates when I was doing design precedents and site analysis, because sometimes InDesign and Adobe Illustrator are just not friendly. They're really
yeah,
mean. And
exactly.
so, yeah, templates just like, okay, I can put the text here. Okay, add a picture there. I would have loved that, And so my hope is that this will help some of the folks that need it, but folks who are like, you know what, I'm about to make my own custom template. I got this. Do your thing, right? When the assignment will be due, and I really want to have y'all present these because I really saw those presentations. I was like, dang, I gotta have y'all present because y'all really learned a lot this semester. Don't y'all agree?
Yeah.
And I really want y'all to display it. And I really wasn't expecting y'all to. I wasn't gonna do it. I was just like, y'all just gonna turn your assignments into me. So your midterms, I wasn't expecting to do presentations for those, but I do want to do presentations for the final. Are y'all okay with that? How y'all feel about that? We can do it online. So that means that your projects will have to be digital.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
So what I'll do is I'll invite some professors to come and hear you all present your finals. And those dates would be, because the last day is the 12th, so we will definitely do that so we can maximize time. And then so that'll be November 5th, I believe. And then, oh, excuse me. Let me check my calendar because I'm in 2 different months. So the 12th is the last day. So yeah, December 5th. So December 5th and December 12th will be the presentation days. It could also be the 28th and the 5th, but To give y'all more time, it'll be the 5th and the 12th. And that's because I also, I'm still trying to get y'all another field trip. And these people are amazing because, it's a crazy world we're living in right now. And I know for the next time I teach, I want to do this, have these things finalized in the summertime. But it's just been really hard to finalize with a couple of the folks. But I am trying to finalize Skid Row. I had gave up on it, and then they reached out to me last week. I was like, okay. And then we have Moontown Farms as an option on November 4th. But I really wasn't trying to do Moontown Farms. That was more of like, okay, let me just do that because we can. But I think that that'll be a great opportunity too. I really wanted to do the inclusive action in the Skid Row though. So the street vendors in the Skid Row. Street vendors is still possible, but I haven't gotten any response. Skid Row has responded. But my thing is, if we are gonna go on a field trip, it would have to be the 4th, last date the 11th. So I'm gonna do a last ditch effort to schedule the Skid Row for the 11th, and then we could potentially do the Moonwater Farms for Friday the 4th. And Skid Row will be the 11th too, yeah, because it's gonna be a weekday. But for the street vendors, what I'm thinking I'm gonna do is have that as a class speaker instead. That way we can have the insight of a stakeholder perspective. And then you all, if you decide to do a project on that type of intervention, you can have that insight and then just choose a street vendor site that you are aware of or that is brought up by the speaker. But again, my goal for this semester was to expose you to sites that you can read for these theories of change, understand the policy design and economic environmental constraints you need to consider, and then conceptualize that intervention. So we will finalize that closing out before the end of the semester. I wanted to expose you to those different types of sites by getting you there in these field trip experiences, and that didn't actually happen in the way that I had anticipated. But I'm really excited about what we got from the Ascot Hills field trip. How did the folks experience the video? How was the video? I know like some of the folks didn't go, but how did y'all experience the video that was recorded? Who watched the video? Juan, did you get a chance to watch the video?
Yes, I actually did watch the video. And besides like having like maybe like issues like listening to some of the conversations, like when you guys were in the I think it was at the amphitheater, yeah. But I mean, besides that, everything else was it kind of felt like I was there. And since I wasn't able to make it, I'm glad that I was able to feel that way. And like because sometimes, like when they send you a video to watch, it's not the best quality. But this one was manageable.
Not saying that one was the best, but I did try to summarize with my voice close to the camera a bit.
Oh yeah, that was really manageable, and it was helpful to get the assignment done.
What about you, Catherine? I know that you went to another field trip, but did you have a chance to watch the video?
I did my field trip assignment based off the 6th Street Bridge in Los Angeles, so I didn't get a chance to watch the video. Sorry for the echo.
No worries, no worries. I really appreciated what you brought up from your field trip, though. The different considerations that could have been made in sight, like the different like trash options that could have been. You mentioned the viewpoint in the bridge and how it's been used to litter, and so yeah, no, thank you for sharing your field trip experience. It was very much so insightful, and for responding to your classmates' responses. I really appreciated seeing that, Catherine. Shout out to you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
But yeah, y'all, I will be preparing those assignments to send out to you. But yes, right now your task is to identify your team member, 2 to 3 people max to a team. I want to do 3. But you know, if you got your person and everybody got their person, it's only 2, that's fine. But 3, again, what my boss says is a lot of hands makes the work light. So definitely take advantage of team members. In regards to the assignment and the task, just generally speaking, developing a site analysis and a design precedent, thumbs up if you're confident about it. Got 1, got 2. I think Hermila's like, finally, whew, thank you. Whew. I was beginning to think we weren't gonna do any of this. I heard that earlier a little bit, that sigh of relief in the chat, Hermila. So I'm excited that we'll be able to do some of that. So y'all saw the folks whose thumbs are up. Folks whose thumbs are up, y'all saw the folks who did not put their thumbs up. Please support your classmates and connect with those folks that, you know, try to partner with folks who are gonna, you know, feel a little concerned about this, right? Take some of that leadership opportunity and collaborate. This is part of collective impact, which is what we'll be learning about next, all right? All right, well, it's been real, y'all. I'll go ahead and stay on for any folks who have any questions, but I look forward to getting your assignments back from the prototype assignment, right? That's still out there. Some of you still owe me your designing for accessibility assignment, so I'll be looking for that. And if you haven't done your field trip review, again, that video is up. If you have another field trip you want to do it on, reach out to me and we can arrange that. But the video is available and it sounds like it is effective. So check it out if you haven't already, just for some insight. Because be mindful that your project final has to be on some type of intervention. So it'll either be a site that we went to, it could be a site from another class, a site that you went to on your own, but it should reflect the intervention, the type of sites that we are looking at, right? Residential, natural landscape, architect, and contested site, okay? So again, I'll be on for a couple of minutes for anyone who has questions, but I'll let you all go for the rest of the evening.
I have a question actually. For the assigned reading, the design for accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
You assigned us chapters, right? I remember mine. I think was chapter 4. Just because
Uh-huh.
that's the one I've been reading. It
Mhm.
wasn't by last names or names, right?
No, that I did assign by chapter.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Mine was number 4. I remember. Okay. Sounds good.
Cool deal.
Hey, Jesus, I left my email on the chat. If you could just reach out to me so we can trade phone numbers. That's all.
You did? I don't see it. Oh, Ed Coolio. Okay, got it. Coolio. Okay, I'll email you right now. Maybe I'll send you my contact info.
Perfect. Thank you, Jesus.
All right, dude. Sounds good. All right.
Hey,
Peace.
Professor.
Thanks, Ronnell.
Yes.
Yeah, I've also been trying to play a catch up with the assignments, but I just wanted to reach out and say that I've been getting to them. I know I need to do the accessibility one, but just wanted to just throw it out there that I'm actually working on getting them done. I'm not sure if you saw my email that day of that we were supposed to go on the field trip, but I had a I had a COVID scare, so I just isolated myself and didn't want to really be out and about, you know.
No worries, no worries. You definitely have to take precautions, you know. It's important.
Yeah.